I was alone on the couch at 3:07 a.m. City sirens bleeding through the cracked window. When his voicemail slid into my phone like a secret. He was 3 whiskeys deep, voice gravelly, saying my name the way he used to when we were still new. I pressed the tiny triangle, let the speaker breathe against my ear, and suddenly the living room smelled like his cologne again. I replayed it once, twice. By the 7th loop, I had memorized the exact quiver in his apology, the half-second pause before he called me baby. Each repetition felt like lighting a cigarette I'd sworn off. A small, deliberate burn I convinced myself I could control. Somewhere between the 8th and 9th play, I caught my reflection in the dark TV screen, eyes wide, thumb hovering, realizing I was treating this 37-second clip like a love song on repeat. The kind that hurts so good you keep the volume just high enough to bruise. I asked the empty room why his chaos sounded like a lullaby to my nervous system. Why the same voice that once left me on read could now rewrite my heartbeat with a slurred "I miss you." The question hung there, heavier than the silence after the message ended. And I knew the answer wouldn't fit inside another replay. I used to stand in my bathroom mirror after another AM exit scene, pointing at my reflection like a furious parent. "You're just a lousy picker." The words tasted metallic, a self-inflicted brand I rehearsed every time someone charming ghosted, gaslit, or simply forgot I had feelings. Then one winter night, too wired to sleep, I opened an old camping journal and found a hand-drawn compass I'd made at 15. North was kind, east was funny, west was safe. I stared at it until the paper trembled. Every needle in my adult life had swung toward danger, yet the compass itself wasn't shattered. Its magnets had simply rusted into new shapes. That was the first crack in the story I'd been telling myself. I wasn't defective. I was following a map drawn by a younger me who'd learned that inconsistency felt like home. Calling it a picking problem kept the shame personal, private, almost glamorous in its self-loathing. But naming it a pattern, something repeatable, observable, almost mechanical, lifted the shame off my skin and placed it on the table where I could turn it in the light. A pattern can be traced, measured, even interrupted. A broken picker just keeps bleeding. So I started saying, I have a pattern of equating longing with love, and the sentence felt oddly gentle, like apologizing to a child who's been lost for years. The moment I stopped calling myself the villain, I could finally ask, who taught me this route? The compass hadn't lied. It had simply obeyed the magnets I'd inherited. I still remember the afternoon I sat on the library floor, laptop balanced on my knees, when 2 papers collided in my browser tabs like headlights on a dark road. One was Ainsworth's strange situation, toddlers clinging, then wailing, then clinging again when the mother returned. The other was Schultz's dopamine spikes, monkey neurons firing hardest not for the juice, but for the unpredictable cue that might deliver juice. I felt my chest tighten, as if both studies were describing the same person, me. I realized my nervous system had been wired by the same 2 forces, an anxious ambivalent attachment style born of a mother who loved me fiercely but disappeared without warning, and a dopaminergic circuitry that learned to crave inconsistency because inconsistency paid off bigger. The boy who texted "I miss you" at AM and vanished for 3 days wasn't cruel. He was a slot machine. My brain, starved for the warm surge of oxytocin I never reliably got, turned every breadcrumb into a jackpot. I replayed his drunk apology not because I was weak, but because my interior cingulate had already logged the pattern: intermittent reinforcement equals maximum reward. The inconsistency wasn't a bug. It was the feature my limbic system had been trained to seek. I felt a strange tenderness for the younger me who mistook whiplash for chemistry. She wasn't broken. She was simply running outdated code written by a mother who loved in bursts and a neurotransmitter that peaks just before the maybe. I used to think the problem was the men. Then I realized the problem was the menu. One night, after I'd swiped through 300 faces in 20 minutes, I felt the same hollow rush I get from slot machines in Vegas. Bells, lights, maybe this time. I wasn't choosing. I was being chosen by the algorithm's endless maybe. Each push of my thumb released a tiny dose of dopamine, not because I'd found love, but because I'd found another chance to find love. The uncertainty itself became the drug. I noticed that the messages I craved most weren't the sweet good morning texts. They were the ambiguous maybe tomorrow replies that left me suspended between hope and despair. That suspension was the hit. The apps had turned my attachment wound into a business model. The more inconsistent the reward, the more fiercely I chased it. I could feel my nervous system rewiring in real time. My pupils dilated at the ellipsis. My pulse spiked at the typing indicator. We talk about addiction to substances, but here I was addicted to potential. Every new match promised the correction of every past rejection, and every ghosting only tightened the loop because the next swipe might finally be the one who stays. I wasn't broken. I was perfectly calibrated to a machine that profits from my longing. The tragedy wasn't that I couldn't find the right person. It was that the search itself had become the relationship I was most faithful to. I was still trembling from the last "I'll call you tomorrow" that never came, when I stumbled on a tiny protocol that changed the voltage in my veins. I call it the 48-hour attachment audit, and it lives in the notes app I once reserved for unsent love poems. The first 24 hours are for body bookkeeping. I track heart rate spikes, sleep minutes, and how many times I reach for my phone like it's an oxygen mask. If the numbers scream louder than my feelings, I know my nervous system is betting on the wrong roulette wheel. The second 24 hours are for the 3-question script I now run before anyone earns a third date. Question 1. When this person is inconsistent, where do I feel it in my body? I place a hand on that exact spot, tight solar plexus, buzzing throat, and name it out loud. Question 2. What story from my childhood rhymes with this sensation? Usually, it's the creak of my father's car pulling away without saying goodbye. Question 3. What secure anchor can I offer myself right now instead of waiting for their text? Sometimes it's texting my sister a photo of my dinner. Sometimes it's placing my bare feet on the cold balcony tiles and counting 10 slow breaths. I borrowed the phrase secure anchor from the lab rats in Schultz's dopamine studies. When the reward became predictable, the spike flattened into steady warmth. So I built tiny rituals that arrive on schedule: Sunday morning coffee on the same bench, a playlist that starts at 7:03 p.m. to teach my brain that safety can also be a source of buzz. After 2 weeks, I noticed the phantom phone vibrations quieted. The voicemail icon stopped glowing like a threat. I wasn't swearing off chemistry, I was redefining it as a slow, reliable simmer I could light myself. I waited until the next full moon glitch, then pressed delete on the voicemail I'd kept for 14 months. The tiny whoosh felt like a puncture, not a loss. The pressure finally equalized. I sat on the fire escape, city lights flickering like leftover dopamine, and let the silence settle where his slurred apology used to loop. For the first time, the quiet wasn't a vacancy begging to be filled by someone else's maybe. It was just quiet, and I was still here. I noticed my hands weren't shaking, my chest wasn't performing its usual anticipatory drum solo. I'd rehearsed this moment so many times in my head, dramatic tears, frantic ray download of the message, that the absence of theater startled me more than the act itself. I realized I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the version of me who mistook inconsistency for electricity. That woman had been brave, in her way, always leaning into the spark even when it burned. But tonight I felt something steadier, curiosity about what calm could feel like if I stopped calling it boring. I walked back inside, poured water into the same glass that once held RAM whiskey, and toasted the empty room. Somewhere between the sip and the swallow, the sentence arrived fully formed: I don't attract chaos, I just learned to call it chemistry. I laughed out loud, the sound round and real, like a bell I'd forgotten I owned. I don't know who I'll love next, but I know the first 3 questions I'll ask, and I know the voicemail inbox is finally spacious enough for my own voice to echo back.